I'm not saying I'm a brave guy, because I'm not.
The airmen of the Royal New Zealand Air Force were well respected in World War II for their ability and attitude.
The odds were enormous against us.
The can-do attitudes remain the same in those who serve today, but they have more diverse roles.
50, 40.
Policing our vast maritime resource, disaster relief, search and rescue,
These are the guys who have saved their lives.
dealing with extreme environments.
When that door opens, some people can get out, some people can't.
You look out that door and there's 5,000 feet below you. That gets your attention.
However, getting through the flying course in the 2020s is difficult.
It tests you in so many ways.
But the reward is age-old, a love of the machine you fly.
You were part of it, and it was part of you.
With the outbreak of World War II, England called on the Commonwealth to play its part, and New Zealand heeded the call.
And when the history of this greater war comes to be written, she'll surely have a place of honour in its pages.
Aircrew trained at several bases in New Zealand, including RNZAF base Ohakea. Today, prospective pilots joining the Royal New Zealand Air Force are still posted to Ohakea, where they undertake a challenging wings course at 14 Squadron. It is the job of the instructors here to teach the students how to fly from scratch.
So taking the ab initio pilots and training them up to reward them with their brevet, which means they're a fully qualified pilot in the RNZAF.
The first half of the sortie for Tom with us in the lead.
And with 3 months to go, wings students know they can still be chopped if they don't meet the required standard.
I have had a chop exam, and I can tell you that certainly it becomes very real.
A lot of it is to do with the rate of learning. So we started with 12 and now we have 9.
You're expected to catch on to things that you're being taught relatively quickly.
The learning curve's definitely been pretty steep.
After their days flying, the students have a visitor in Morris, a World War II Spitfire pilot who's made the journey with his son Richard to see an old friend from nearly 80 years ago.
Beautiful plane though, isn't it?
Yeah, nice plane.
Did you find it hard going from one aircraft onto the next one?
No, I can't say it did. Really?
Or more talented than us.
So this has got AL for Alan Deere. You remember Alan?
Good guy, and a good shot too.
Alan Deere was New Zealand's second highest scoring ace in World War II. And perhaps one of the luckiest, walking away from 9 crashes.
There's no good reason why he actually even survived.
His nephew Brendan has restored this Spitfire in honour of his uncle's time in World War II, which included 22 confirmed victories.
He became an ace, which is shooting down 5 enemy aircraft shortly after Dunkirk. In fact, just north of Dunkirk, he was hit and managed to crash land onto the beach. And he was back flying from Hornchurch 19 hours after being shot down.
That's how you got your scar on your head.
Morris too survived a crash.
And that pilot, he lost his eyes.
He'd be, "Hey, Red, where are you? Where are you, Red?" And that was me.
Yeah.
And I'd grab him by the shoulders and say, "Follow my voice."
Morris was posted to 485 New Zealand Squadron, one of the 7 dedicated New Zealand squadrons and a top scorer in fighter command. There's only a handful of pilots left. Max is another of those survivors.
Well, 485 Squadron had a crest, and underneath was the words Ka Whaiwhai Tonu, which means we fight to the end. And that's what we believed in. We had another name for it, which means we're in the shit.
And Max often found himself in exactly that predicament, losing 3 Spitfires.
At Bodenplaat, the Germans drafted all the airfields, and one was a Droper Joker landed on top of me. The propeller there, and my head was right in the middle of it. Yes, I was very lucky, yeah.
Fighter Command were tasked with bomber escort, air-to-air combat, and strafing targets.
Privileged to show you the grand fellows of a New Zealand fighter squadron.
The New Zealand pilots often personalised their Spitfires, and Max wanted a reminder of Hawke's Bay.
Named after my hometown, Waipawa.
Although a New Zealander, Philip Stewart flew with RAF squadrons and also counts himself lucky.
We had a dogfight over the French coast. The aircraft was on fire. I decided I was going to have to bail out.
Which he successfully did, earning him the Goldfish Club badge.
Because I'd used a dinghy.
The same incident saw him inducted into the infamous Caterpillar Club.
Everyone who saved his life with a parachute was given a little gold caterpillar. That was because your parachutes were made of silk.
Max is another rare member of the Caterpillar Club.
I went out to dive bomb this bridge and I was hit by flak. The engines went up in flames, so I jumped over the side. I took the parachute home with me and cut it up for a scarf for every one of the squadron.
Dave Iggo is also a 485 man. His Spitfire named after his hometown, Aranui. He still has the uniform items potentially useful to a downed pilot in enemy territory.
This is a collar stud. They call it an escape compass. It was hidden on yourself.
Along with 2 buttons, which, once united, indicated north, and a silk map. He's also kept his, quite literally, war-torn wings.
In the plane, you sat on your parachute, that was your seat, and you had a safety harness that came over each shoulder. That's where the wings were, just at your pocket level. The chafing of the harness, and that's how they got warm.
His non-flying set of wings remained in pristine condition, as seen on his wedding day attire 4 days after D-Day.
I got special leave, because all leave was cancelled prior to D-Day.
We weren't told anything about it in advance at all.
The amphibious D-Day assault in Normandy, France on the 6th of June 1944 effectively turned the war in favour of the Allies.
Our role was to attack locomotives and also any vehicles that were moving.
D-Day fighter pilots were tasked with both air-to-ground and air-to-air combat, which Morris's squadron took on successfully.
So he knocked out the engine and then he let the rest of you guys
finish it off.
Finish it off, yeah. And that was the first 2 planes that were taken out on D-Day.
If it had failed, it would have been an absolute disaster. So whatever job you were given to do, you had to do it extremely well. And we had to succeed.
There were bodies piled on the 4 corners of the airfield, and they had flamethrowers going on them 24 hours a day. There was just so much carnage.
Yeah, no.
Stop the disease spreading. Pretty horrific sight, really.
Yeah, war's a mess.
I don't like it.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy wars. Killed millions of people for no good whatsoever. Still, if the country goes to war, you've got to go too.
We lost so many people. It was not uncommon to lose 6 guys in one day. One of the toughest things was coming back and finding that your roommate had gone and you had to pack up his things and take them to his wife or next of kin.
Amongst the horror and the sadness were good times too.
Eddie Atkins was engaged. I was best man for him, and I flew over. We got him married, and then I took off to fly home after I'd had a few drinks. They opened up the airfield and put a searchlights on for me, and I got home.
Do you remember that, Dad? Chalky White bringing a girl back to the base in his Spitfire.
Oh, Chalky White.
Yeah. And then out of the plane steps a girl.
Yeah. She had lots of hair, and he was trying to look beyond the hair, just fly the bloody plane.
This Spitfire won't have anyone in the cockpit tonight, but it will be the star guest behind the top table at Ohakia as the military community gather to commemorate the Battle of Britain. The Spitfire is synonymous with the 1940 Battle of Britain, where Winston Churchill's few halted Germany's hoped-for invasion of Britain.
Air Vice Marshal Sir Keith Park was one of the leaders to win renown in those days, a New Zealander directing the fighter defence of Britain.
with his countrymen providing the most foreign pilots, second only to the Poles. Some 80 years later at RNZAF base Ohakea, where many of these men learned to fly, Brendan Deere tows his Spitfire across the tarmac to be part of a commemoration. The heroic Battle of Britain actions in a Spitfire of his uncle Alan Deere made him an ace twice over by the end of 1940, with 11 enemy aircraft destroyed. Going on to lead numerous squadrons and wings throughout World War II, his contribution, and that of many like him, are remembered at the annual Battle of Britain dinner. A formal military dinner is called a dining in, and it always ends with the tradition of passing the port and a toast to the head of state. Echoing Winston Churchill's Battle of Britain assertion that never was so much owed by so many to so few, there's another toast to the few airmen who established air superiority over England in 1940.
The few.
While some spent their war in fighters during the day in Fighter Command, others flew at night in Bomber Command.
Night after night, these young men carried the war to the enemy.
The annual New Zealand Bomber Command Memorial Service has less veterans every year.
We have 35 RAF Bomber Command veterans. They're all in their 90s, some are over 100.
There's only about 2% left. It's a dying race.
It was hazardous work, and the odds were against them.
By the end of World War II, 6,000 New Zealanders had volunteered for serving Bomber Command, and around 1,850 were killed.
At Auckland's Motat, Ron and his daughters are dwarfed by the Lancaster, one of only a handful left in the world.
How old were you?
I was 20 then.
Ron was a Lancaster bomb aimer on 75 New Zealand Squadron. Like their fighter compatriots at 485, the Kiwi Bomber Boys at 75 were also very good at what they did.
For several periods, it held top score in Bomber Command for the number of operational sorties flown.
The day of a raid, they would see if there was a raid posted for that night. They would check their aircraft, talk to their ground crew.
We'd used every bit of daylight getting the plane ready. It lifted more than its own weight in bombs.
Now there was 7 on the crew. He had 2 gunners, bomb aimer, who acted as the front gunner, flight engineer, wireless operator, navigator, and of course the pilot.
Contact.
Takeoff was a time of great tension. We'd struggle to get off the ground.
What time of the night would you lift off?
We'd be getting into twilight, crossing the English coast.
Oxygen on.
By the time we got to the French coast, it'd be dark. We had to keep in a bomber stream, no navigation lights.
They wouldn't see each other. They might feel one another as they cross the slipstream of a bomber in front, and they'd feel a bang and a bump.
We can't get a pinpoint, but we're just crossing the coast.
Navigation in those days was basically a compass, a map, a sextant. There was no GPS.
Alter course 110 true.
The closer they came to their target, the more perilous their situation.
We'd have to run the gauntlet, just hoping you'd get there. On the ground, sparkles all over the place, echo guns.
You'd hear the rattle of the shrapnel along the sides of the aircraft.
Black clouds would appear all around us. There'd be a forest of searchlights gently waving. Then suddenly cone somebody, and we'd see the fighters shooting at the bombers. Then bang, explosion in the sky.
There would be radio silence unless one in the crew saw a problem. If a night fighter was approaching, the rear gunner might suddenly call out, skip, corkscrew left.
Which was down left, down right, up left, up right, down left, down right, up left, up right. Quite violent.
As a bomb aimer, Ron's position nearing the target was in the nose of the plane.
Lying down on my chest, the mosquitoes were there as the pathfinders up high, dropping the target indicators to show us where to bomb.
Hello, Skip. First flash is just going down.
It was a kaleidoscope of colour and action. I was fascinated. It is still vivid to me. I can still picture some of the targets.
Bomb nose open. She's all yours, bomb aimer. Ready, ready.
Drop the bombs.
Bomb's gone.
and they'd continue flying for at least 30 seconds to get the all-important target photo.
Sitting ducks, straight and level, then we could turn off into friendly darkness. It was wonderful.
Not all crews got home though. Sometimes their fuel ran out.
We never knew we'd make it or not with our petrol tanks.
Or they simply lost their way.
And there are lots of cases where the aircraft flew right across Britain, weren't even aware that Britain was below them, and were never seen again. From Bomber Command, there were 20-odd thousand still untraced.
I was one of the lucky ones to get through.
So too was his neighbour Arthur, a pilot on the Lancaster bomber with 617 Squadron.
Good on you, you're looking well.
You're looking much younger.
Famously known as the Dam Buster Squadron.
They crewed up by assembling in a hangar together.
And you were left to choose a crew from the assembled crowd, and they could also look at you and see what they thought of you. Basil, our navigator, he just came along and said, I'm your navigator, so that's how the crew formed, basically.
He's the sole remaining pilot who bombed the Tirpitz twice.
She was built to be as unsinkable as a ship could be.
Mr. Churchill evidently wanted the beast sunk because it was the largest battleship there was in the world, and it was a menace.
The RAF would evolve a 12,000-pound armour-piercing bomb.
We were able to bomb before the German fighters turned up. Every successful operation you did, you were very lucky to get back to England.
In 1941, getting back to home base for 175 Squadron bomber crew came down to the bravery of their co-pilot James Ward, 13,000 feet in the air.
Meet the crew of the Wellington bomber, which was in danger of disaster from fire until Sergeant Ward climbed out on the wings and smothered the flames.
His old school in Whanganui is the venue for the launch of a new book about him.
I had no idea I'd be doing this when I left New Zealand. You're the first New Zealand VC, but I know you won't be the last. Jolly good show.
Jack Wakefield is here. He was a rear gunner on the same squadron.
Always believed that I had the ability to get them first. So nothing was going to happen to me. And as it turned out, and I was very lucky, nothing did. Apart from one crash, I was slightly singed.
Removing the perspex from the central astro hatch on the top of his crashed Wellington left a very narrow gap to escape a burning plane.
The distance to the astro hatch was about 6 feet. Normally you can't jump 6 feet, but I did. I shot out the top like a rabbit.
Jack still gets to 75 Squadron reunions, and a portrait of his fellow squadron member, James Ward, hangs in the officers' mess at Ohakia. Out the front is the last aircraft flown by 75, the Skyhawk.
And it's a really important reflection on our history. 2001, the government elected to disband the Air Combat Force. That was a really huge change for any Air Force to not have that combat capability and that fast fighter bomber sense.
On exercise with allies, the New Zealand strike pilots would often garner admiration after adversarial sorties.
A lot of these guys would come back and say, how did you do that with your old aeroplane? You know, I've got my new aeroplane, and it's not what you got, it's how you use it and how you're trained to use it. So yeah, we used to hold our own, don't worry. We were a tightly knitted unit. Because we always flew in formation, we were always relying on each other.
Skills that are still in demand, but with much older aircraft.
Of course, Air Force guys bring a skill set which the people don't get in Civvy Street, and it's formation flying.
Something a Pacific War vet is about to experience. And the current wing students at Ohakia are only just starting.
Formation flying is quite the experience.
Very, very scary.
They often say it's the transition from an aviator to a military aviator, and I can see why.
Throughout the decades, wartime or peace, a core skill of military flying is flying in formation, something the current wings students are coming to grips with.
So today they're really learning how to safely fly close to another aircraft. It can be quite a task.
2 to 3 airplanes go out to the training areas and try to stay as close as we can to each other.
Lots of speed, lots of finesse that you sort of need to stay with your wingman. It's a neat sort of transition from thinking about yourself all the time to thinking, okay, now I've got a wingman that I need to look after as well.
The simulator is useful to cement new skills, like formation flying.
It also allows us to practice some organisational sides of flying. We spend about 1/3 of our sorties in the simulator.
For those emergency-based things, it's really good for that. Things that we wouldn't generally want to do in the aircraft, like shutting down an engine and practicing emergency landings.
As a World War II Pacific fighter pilot, Brian Cox had an emergency landing that no simulator could ever have prepared him for. 75 years on, he's looking forward to being part of a Warbirds formation flypast over the Auckland War Memorial Museum.
We have our red, and that'll be our formation as we go over the cenotaph.
He's taking to the skies in a P-40 Kitty Hawk, an aircraft he spent many hours in.
The P-40 was very strongly built and also responsive to control movements and very aerobatic. Quite nostalgic. Except that I was more used to sitting in the front seat than the rear seat. I didn't expect that much, no.
No, nor did I. Have you got your wallet? I've got to fill it up.
After training on Kitty Hawks in New Zealand, Brian flew Corsairs in the Pacific.
These planes have already been flown by US pilots. Now New Zealand pilots are taking them over and taking them up against Japan.
The Pacific Theatre in World War II saw America working alongside the New Zealanders to arrest the threat of Japanese invasion forces reaching New Zealand.
Until we had to do this from 1942 onwards, the RNZAF was producing as many crews as we could to go and fight in Europe. Then the war comes to us in the Pacific, and suddenly the RNZAF is having to run its own combat operations in our own region.
And you boys with bombs, hit the bridges, striking targets of opportunity.
I was at Green Island, a New Zealand base 150 miles east of Rabaul, where there was 100,000 Japanese.
He was flying back to this tiny coral atoll from Rabaul when his formation of 15 Corsairs was separated in a huge storm, turning day to night.
In the darkness, I was feeling around to try and find one switch out of 20, which was cockpit lighting, and instead of turning it on, I turned my own battery switch off, so I had no electrics, couldn't see anything. I had no idea what direction I was flying in, and I knew that I had probably less than half an hour of fuel left, but I couldn't ditch in the water because I couldn't see the water, it was pitch black.
The wild tropical weather was about to throw him a life-saving moment of clarity.
There was a flash of lightning and had trees directly below me. That was Green Island. Now I was flying at 4 miles a minute, and I mean a minute earlier and a minute later I wouldn't have seen it because Green Island was only 4 miles across. Out of the 15 of us that left Rabaul, only 8 of us landed. The other 7 crashed.
Ron Hermans was also in the Pacific, but on the ground servicing the aircraft. He's celebrating his 108th birthday at the Air Force Museum.
New Zealand fighter pilots are bagging more and more zeros. They owe part of their success to the ground crews who service their planes.
We tried to work a 6-day week.
Keeping the planes in fighting trim isn't easy here, but they overhaul them thoroughly from prop to tail wheel.
We tried to have 1 day free for catching up with mending and hobbies. And I used to make things from bits of aircraft that were damaged.
Spent cartridge shells and perspex were transformed into jewellery, along with PowerShell brought from home. His other passion of photography required an illegal item, a camera.
Before we left New Zealand, we'd take it all to pieces and each one would carry this little piece, hoping that when we arrived, we'd be able to put the camera together and use it, and we did that. Well, we got by, illegally, of course.
The ground crews have done their work, and the air crews are taking over to go out against Rabaul in New Britain.
Post-World War II, the RNZAF has continued to play its part deploying to conflicts globally.
We've had people serving in Cyprus and Malaya. We've had people in East Timor, people in Vietnam. We've had them stationed in Somalia, in Iran, in Bougainville, operating into Afghanistan, and to this day serving in operations in the Middle East. Advancing New Zealand's security interests around the world and in our own neighbourhood, never quite on the same scale as the Second World War, thankfully.
RNZAF base Ohakia in the Manawatu opened in 1939 to train men for World War II. It is a pivotal expanding base for the Air Force. As well as being home to initial flying training at 14 Squadron, helicopters are also based here at 3 Squadron. Their role ranges from search and rescue and disaster relief to combat tasking.
Primarily, we're a battlefield support helicopter squadron. We are ready at a moment's notice to deploy to be able to support New Zealand Army to deliver a combat effect.
They can also be deployed overseas by working with international partners. The Australian C-17 heavy lift can carry the NH-90s across the Tasman to help combat their bushfires.
So these are able to be packed away and folded into a C-17, flown into an area and unpacked, and within the space of 48 hours we can deploy NH-90s and have them up and operational and essentially anywhere in the world.
I've deployed a couple of times, yeah. You think about the people that you were supporting there and they were in a pretty bad place. And you will see things that you would have preferred that you didn't see, and that's just one of the things that you have to be ready for.
Arriving at a village that has really been decimated, you know, you turn up with one of these, got Kiwis on board. They were getting people who genuinely cared and they were going to get a significant amount of support.
The way we respond to cyclone relief, climate events in the Pacific, these are things that are going to increasingly become more frequent for us.
Although they're often flying much further afield to places like Asia and the Middle East, the Pacific is also a regular destination for 5 Squadron, flying P-3 Orions. Tasked with surveillance and reconnaissance, their work globally includes surveying natural disasters, counter-narcotics and counter-terrorism work, anti-submarine warfare, and search and rescue. They regularly patrol over New Zealand's economic exclusion zone and extend the help to Pacific Island nations.
Supporting their fisheries areas, they don't have the ability to police it themselves.
We're an island, we live in a huge maritime domain, so having an understanding of what goes on in our area, who's in it, that's your Defence Force, particularly your Air Force and your Navy who are out there keeping an eye on that.
We can see that things are changing in the Pacific. Climate change is changing the dynamics. Transnational crime adds different dynamics. So we need to be more present.
We were doing a flight up in the islands a couple of months ago. One of the crew called out that he could see there was shark finning on that vessel. We were able to report that and get them prosecuted.
5 Squadron also get called upon to help people in need, as New Zealand has one of the largest maritime search and rescue regions in the world, approximately 1/11 of the globe. Transposed over the Northern Hemisphere, it stretches from the North Pole to North Africa.
We found a vessel that had suffered an explosion overnight. There was 14 crew with no food, water or communications. Fortunately on the P3 we've got a unique capability where we can drop about a shoebox sized container. In there we put in fresh water and a radio. We found another vessel, called them in to rescue them.
But there was still one person unaccounted for, without a life jacket.
So we flew up and down for 6 hours, about 300 yards spacing each time. We came across a fishing buoy. The second time we flew past it, the camera operator just sees a small face turn upwards and look at the plane. We managed to drop him a raft and the rescue vessel came and picked him up.
While search and rescue work is unable to be predicted, the regular surveillance work of 5 Squadron is.
Successive governments in New Zealand have always wanted daily, weekly, monthly utility out of the Defence Force assets that we need for combat.
One of the major roles for the Air Force and the Navy is to protect our resource stocks at sea.
Which means regular patrols by 5 Squadron over a huge expanse of ocean, as New Zealand has the 4th largest economic exclusion zone in the world.
Today's
mission is to head down to the subantarctic islands. The MPI want us to have a look at the fishing fleet, make sure that they're complying with the rules.
Invercargill provides a chance to refuel, pick up government fisheries officers and brief for the mission ahead.
Conditions down there are not very good. The wind is reasonably strong and there's quite a big swell.
Approaching 1,000 feet. Continue level.
The exclusive economic zone goes out to 200 miles from New Zealand's coast, which is a huge expanse of water.
Low flying means life jackets on under 1,000 feet.
9,000 feet. Life jackets.
So we fly past the fishing vessels at 200 feet.
Beam it. Now.
We're able to get a good camera image of the vessel at that height.
Send it to the Auckland Island area. It could be quite bumpy, so hold on to something or sit down, strap in if you can.
Weather's quite dynamic. The patterns will move through around the pole quite a lot faster.
But it's probably rough as guts up against that coastline.
The vast marine area New Zealand covers requires ongoing, updated capability.
What we fly today is actually quite a capable modern version of the P3 from the 1960s.
The P3 Orion will soon be replaced by the P8 Poseidon. The amount of work this new P8 will be able to do is immense.
And it's not just fixed-wing aircraft that look after New Zealand's marine interests. Often, it's helicopters. Protecting New Zealand's marine interests sees the Air Force and Navy working together. The Air Force NH-90 helicopters can deploy on naval vessels, although it's the Navy's Sea Sprite helicopter that is usually in the onboard hangar.
That's an integral fighting part of the ship and puts a big bubble of protection around them.
Navy pilots, like Jesse, are taught to fly by the Air Force before joining 6th Squadron to fly the Naval Sea Sprite, which are maintained by the Air Force whether on land or at sea.
So that's a great example of two of the services working together.
The Naval and Air Force helicopters also deploy together annually to the South Island. While the Naval Sea Sprites stay coastal, the Air Force A109s and NH-90s from 3 Squadron head for the hills. Their role here is to help dock, access hard-to-reach sites, and to hone their skills in difficult terrain.
There's a few different things at play in the mountains. It's a lot about weather, operating the aircraft at higher altitude. The rotor's less efficient, the engines don't provide as much power.
Slowly during the 2 weeks, we build up the complexity of the tasks, we increase the altitude, we increase the weight of the aircraft so that when they get called out in the middle of the night and the weather's bad and they're having to carry search and rescue teams, it's not the first time they've seen it.
You're making sure you've got room to escape if you encounter a big downdraft of air.
It can be quite windy, especially when you're working around the ridges.
Communication about the weather is a key part of any mountain flying.
So everyone's aware of what's going on. It's a lot easier to lose reference with the terrain. In overcast environments like this, obviously we don't want to be flying into cloud.
In the front, we are not able to see past our 3 and 9 o'clock. So I'm really relying on the guys in the back to let me know how it's looking from their point of view.
We work as a team. We're landing in confined areas. We make sure the aircraft is clear of obstacles where the pilots can't see.
Ideally, if it's flat enough to get a couple of wheels down, that's great.
Training as a cohesive crew in testing environments means that when the search and rescue call does come, the team are well prepared. Back in the hands of the ground crew, keeping the airframes flight ready is the domain of the maintenance flight commander.
And I'm responsible for the technical airworthiness of 2 aircraft types, the NH-90 and the A109. We maintain the aircraft from a technical point of view and ensure that they're safe to fly.
Maintaining these high-tech helicopters needs a variety of skilled technicians.
Everyone has their own specific role to carry out. We have a very diverse range of issues we face.
But collectively, they solve them. Having a high number of aircraft in a small fleet ready and able to fly at a moment's notice is unusual internationally.
So we're the fleet leader for availability on the NH-90, so we often have other nations that are very interested in how we maintain this high availability rate.
We put that down to a number of things. One is the typically Kiwi ingenious way in which we approach aircraft maintenance scheduling. We do it in the most sensible, pragmatic way.
Another is the size, talent and co-location of the maintenance workforce, not only for 3 Squadron, but for all aircraft at Ohakia.
We're very fortunate in that we're a very small team, and the workforce are obviously very technically skilled. They're very passionate about what they do.
Everybody who supports the availability of the aircraft, whether it's the squadron itself, whether it's the deeper maintenance team, the fleet planners, the supply side of the house, we're all under one roof. We can put all our heads together and come up with an innovative solution to solving problems. 3 Squadron really comes into its own when we're challenged, and I think one of the biggest challenges has been the Kaikoura earthquake.
We had our NH90 helicopters flying from Ohakea towards the earthquake epicentre in Kaikoura even before the sun had come up the next morning.
Initially it was all about evacuating people. Helicopters were one of the only options with only a really small airstrip in Kaikoura there.
The vulnerable people who need to be brought out of the region, and then inserting the search and rescue teams and other aid agencies in. It's extremely rewarding when we see the positive effects that we're able to achieve, because that's what we joined up for.
The newest recruits, the Wings students, are completing the away phase of their flying training, known as Exercise WWII.
WWII is a deployed exercise for our students, effectively designed around taking the students out of their comfort zone.
Whilst en route, we'll look to manoeuvre with Brad and Echelon. Cool.
Their time in the Deep South will see them finesse their formation flying and practice low-level navigation.
The new environment adds that additional complexity with new airfield dynamics, new traffic.
Joining the air traffic today is 42 Squadron's King Air 350 with the Ohakea Base Commander on board. Post-graduation, this is the next stop for fixed-wing pilots.
They spend about 18 months on 42 Squadron consolidating on a multi-engine aircraft, and then they fly the Hercules, the Boeing or the Orion.
In a command position, it's really great to get out and go and see the team doing what they're doing on the ground.
It happens to be a significant day for one of the students.
Today I did my formation solo.
Congratulations, that's a big deal.
And there's some long-standing inter-squadron rivalry to address.
Have you had a WWII sign?
We did have a WWII sign.
Oh, yeah.
We brought it down on a big sheet of metal. 42 Squadron came and stole it.
We have some very skilled pilots who are able to climb up ladders and unscrew WWII signs from hangars and then put them into the back of the aircraft.
To join the many others on display in the 14 Squadron hangar at Ohakea from past WWII exercises. Soon enough, the Wings students will be back here too, hoping to tackle the final phases of flying training.
We've got our check flight in 3 flights' time, so we're just refining the skills and getting them to a standard that's good enough to move on.
If they don't reach the course standard, and after some retraining, they must endure an all-or-nothing test flight.
There's a fair bit riding on it. The next flight is a must-pass flight.
If they fail, they face being removed from the course. One of the most exhilarating aspects of aeronautics is aerobatics, a skill the Wings students are mastering in the last weeks of the course.
This afternoon I'll be heading out with my instructor. We're looking to consolidate our aerobatic display sequence that we'll be doing today.
After each phase of the course, students need to pass a check flight. If it's a fail, they receive extra flying tuition.
After 3 hours of remediation training, look to refly the check flight.
Otherwise known as a chop flight. Fail, and you can be chopped from the course.
We've had guys go out on chop flights earlier in course. It's pretty sobering, pretty yuck. We kind of hope that we're close enough to the end now where guys should know what they're doing.
With graduation near, the students' thoughts turn to the next step in their Air Force careers.
My goal is to be a helicopter pilot.
I'd be really passionate to jump into some more fixed wing. The P8 would be awesome to fly.
They'll turn up by 2023.
The new Hercs will be a really good platform to fly as well.
The C-130J will replace the current C-130s. Overall, the roles and tasks won't really change that much. Overseas, you'll find that each Hercules squadron is good at a couple of things, but for us, we have to have 6 or 7 distinct roles all wrapped up into that one squadron.
.40 Squadron is the home of the Hercules C-130 and the Boeing 757. Transporting personnel and equipment globally, their destinations are not always peaceful or straightforward.
Military flying is all about managing risk. We have to put our C-130s into an environment where they may be shot at. As a military, we have to operate into airfields that have been compromised in some way. All of that requires careful skill training and use of judgment.
Attributes that come into their own when the destination is Antarctica.
A lot of risk there for us with the weather changing, but it's a huge reward for the science foundations and the New Zealand government and also the US government.
For the Boeing 757, it's a day trip from Christchurch, and it starts very early with the initial weather brief instigating a go or no-go decision.
I think we'll push on. Let's go.
A detailed Met brief on video link provides more detail.
You can see the area of cloudiness that's filling in.
With the suggestion that the weather might improve, the decision is made to fly.
Down on the ice, it's bloody cold today. The weather's not exactly perfect, so it's going to be busier for us than normal.
B1, rotate.
The arrival weather is meticulously assessed as they fly south.
Horizon definition's min, fair and poor, so we're on the limits for that one.
So there's a point along our route where we actually have to make a decision that progressing past that point is the safest course of action.
The point of safe return, or PSR, is the point where there is still enough fuel to safely return to New Zealand. And with no divert airfields, flying beyond this means they absolutely must land in Antarctica.
We don't have enough fuel to turn around and go back to Dunedin or Christchurch. We have to be convinced that it's safe enough to carry on to Antarctica. And the viz is unrestricted viz. Have you carry on?
It's got bases on the far side of it.
Yeah. Got the other side. Got some heat perception now. Get out at 20 things.
Speed brake up.
With the scientists and support crew safely delivered, is a turnaround time of less than 2 hours.
Today we were able to depart visually past Mount Erebus on our way northbound.
By nightfall, another challenging Antarctic return trip has been completed.
And checklist is complete.
50, 40.
Great job. Shut them down.
The 757 travels to many destinations. In 2012, it took a group of World War II veterans to the opening of London's Bomber Command Memorial, including Ron Mayhill. Conversations with the flight crew were poignant.
They'd share stories that they went through.
But it's hard to explain bombing cities in peacetime.
We had some silent moments in the flight deck to truly appreciate the hardships, and it put everything in perspective.
They epitomised all of the values that we really lean heavily on today and build into our organisation.
An organisation that now has 9 brand new pilots graduating with their wings.
They've put in the hard yards for 12 or 18 months and achieved huge success under a lot of pressure.
Very, very proud of them all.
Their course flight commander will fly overhead today as part of the Black Falcons aerobatic team.
Wings course was a bit of a battle. I'm absolutely elated to be finished.
I'm absolutely ecstatic about today. The course has been a hard road.
It's the biggest challenge I've ever faced.
But Lockie's hard work has paid off. He tops the course.
Pretty chuffed and humbled at that, but couldn't have done any of the wings course without the group of lads with me.
You are here to deliver military operations on behalf of New Zealand. Your graduation today is but one step on that journey.
They're now serving in an air force that has a reputation, decades in the making, in times of peace, crisis and conflict.
We have always been seen internationally as very small but very professional players who know their stuff. The key to that has always been the quality of the individuals.
People who sign up to serve their country, even in times of war.
You had to fly and you had to fight. You just had to do it.
We were patriots, really, for the times. We're proud of being New Zealanders.
You never know what's around the corner. The best thing that we can do is have good capabilities, good people.
We don't always bring the biggest, shiniest toys to the party, but our people and the equipment and capabilities that we do bring are generally highly valued and deliver on what we offer.